Joining us now is Dan Eberhart, a political commentator and the author of the book The Switch, America's Global Energy Renaissance. So Dan, Republicans do have the advantage that compared to last week, Democrats had to go first. They had to experiment with this remote type of convention for the very first time. Republicans are looking to make it a little bit more in person, at least that's what they want to convey, but it's still nonetheless going to be a remote convention for the large part. So what are you going to be looking out for this week?
Well, I'd rather go second. I think the Republicans have a small tactical advantage with that, but I really think that it's about, really about the messaging. And the Democrats seem, Biden's speech was maybe a tad more centrist, but the Democratic Party has been really overtaken by the left. And I think we saw an awful lot of that last week. I'm looking to see, what Republicans and Trump and Pence are planning to do. I'm looking to see hopefully a more hopeful message than what came out of the Democratic convention. And I'm hoping to hear Trump talk about some of the things he's accomplished and some of the things he wants to accomplish. And the last thing I'm really hoping is that I'm hoping that Pence and some of the other folks really try to take down, Biden's record, I think, is really abysmal. He had an opportunity to accomplish a lot of stuff when he was vice president, didn't do it. Yet now somehow he's going to get even more done that's even more progressive. If I was a liberal voter, I don't think I'd be buying that message. But nonetheless, that's what he tried to portray. So I'd really like to see some of the Republicans poke holes in, some of these lofty balloons that Biden's campaign floated during the convention that I think just don't hold water in terms of Biden's accomplishments or where he's trying to take the party.
And I think you raise a very important point, too, and it's the idea that the Democratic convention was very much so emotion-based. I don't know how many times I heard that saying the soul of the nation or whatever it was, and I understand why they're doing that. I understand that they feel like they can appeal to maybe their electorate or maybe those more moderate voters, the independent ones who may side with more conservative economic policies sometimes, but maybe right now are feeling a little bit fatigued by the political cycle. I think that's who they're trying to reach out to right now, whereas the Republicans, for example, I feel like this is their opportunity to do just what you said, kind of break down what Biden thinks is his positive, that being his experience, but Republicans may see that as a negative, say that he has 40 years to really break down his record and show where he's gone wrong. Do you think that the next couple of days will be more policy and substantive based than the DNC?
I think the Republican convention is really going to be I think it's going to be both more positive and more policy based. The fact is, the Democrats, and I really, I'm glad I'm a Republican on Democrat because they had to basically take Biden's 40-year record and not talk about it for 4 days because they don't want to talk about the fact that he pushed all the crime bill. They don't want to talk about the wars he voted for.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk about, all this economic growth and the fact that the recovery during the Obama and Biden administration was the slowest economic recovery in the history of our country. They want to whitewash all of that. And they put forth this economic plan that could have been pulled, off the shelf from pre-COVID. It seems kind of tone deaf to me. I really think they had quite a quandary, whereas I think Trump has actual accomplishments to run on. And he can say, look, this is what I've done. This is what I've accomplished during my term. COVID's happened. That's put the economy on our hind feet for a bit. But that would have, affected any president. And Trump's really accomplished a lot. So I would really much rather be the Republicans, playing, going second, having a positive message, and having Trump's 3.5-year record as opposed to Biden's 40-year record. I think as far as, who's going to win the convention, I think we're really well placed to make a more positive message that's geared towards centrist voters. I don't think the Democrat convention was geared towards people in the middle at all.
And you bring up another interesting point, and it's the idea that it was a very bleak type of speech. The entirety of the Democratic convention was very bleak to some degree, but they would kind of at the end try to lift it up with Kamala Harris or Joe Biden at the final speech. So, for example, President Obama, he gave one of the more dark speeches that I've ever seen him give, kind of warning about democracy being at stakes, things of that nature. And then it would go into Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, who would try to portray maybe a little bit more of an opportunity or a more optimistic vision for the party moving forward. Do you suspect that that's what will happen for the Republican side as well, where maybe earlier in the day some of these candidates will attack NAFTA, will attack Joe Biden voting for the Iraq War or his 1994 crime bill, and then hand it over to President Trump in that more coveted 10 p.m. hour where maybe he lifts up the spirits?
I think yes and no. I think yes in that Pence and some of these other folks are really going to work on Biden's record and trying to expose, flaws in it and claims he's made that aren't true. But I also think that one of the major differences in Trump and Biden is Biden's speech basically really could have been for a different convention than the one that just happened with everyone else. So, but Trump is not going to hide behind Pence and the rest of his surrogates to do the heavy lifting, to poke the holes in his opponent. Trump will carry his own water in that way. And so I think that's really just a big contrast in Trump and Biden is Trump is willing to take on his opponent to do the heavy lifting and to not kind of hide behind others and look for others to take him down. And I think that's really a big difference. Trump is a leader. He's not willing to take the blows. He's not willing to do the heavy work himself. And whereas I think Biden was very content with, look, I'm going to give a softer speech, pretend to be a little bit more centrist, even though that's not my voting record. And these other, 18 people are going to focus on, the hatchet and trying to take down Trump. Trump is more of a leader, more of a man, and more willing to carry his own water, I think, than Biden.
I think that's a good point. And I think, too, when you look at what happened last week as well, I think that it shows that the Democratic Party wants to make this a referendum against President Trump, whereas the Republican Party seems to make this with the optimistic tone that we keep talking about, looking ahead, kind of saying, this is what happened. This was an unprecedented pandemic, something that only happens once every 100 years, something of that nature. So who do you trust to build back this country? I mean, even the slogans, it's Make America Great Again against Build Back Better, or something that is basically the same thing, but phrased a little bit differently. Is that what this race will come down to for the independent, the moderate voters who will decide this race?
I really hope it comes down to who thinks that in terms of the economy, education, and taking care of the country, who's got a tough but modestly positive, affirmative, pro-American message. And I think that the Republicans with Trump are going to win that every time. Biden had, the entire convention was kind of clouded in darkness. You just kept waiting for the part of the movie where there's an attack or it gets gloomy and the bad negative music comes on. To me, it lacked a lot of the patriotism that you typically see in both conventions. It lacked a lot of kind of the red, white, and blue, pro-America stuff and trying to be, a uniter and a healer and not a divider. And I feel like the Democrat convention really lacked a lot of that. It was just like, let's throw rocks at Trump. It wasn't we can do better. It wasn't America is better. It wasn't America can recover from this virus together. It was Trump's bad. Everything's bad. And then in a softer voice, we can do better, but not really with a lot of policy surrounding that. I think that Trump has got momentum in terms of bringing the economy back. And I think that he's shown that he can, work hard through this pandemic and carry us on his shoulders to a certain degree. And, also have some humility with that. And I think that the Democrats, particularly Biden, it's really amazing this guy won the primary. He had the lowest turnout among, all the major candidates in terms of who attended his speeches during the primaries. Yet somehow this guy was able to pull off a victory. But there just seems to me to be a huge enthusiasm gap between Trump supporters and Trump's base, and Biden's base just seems a heck of a lot smaller.
No, I mean, I think you're exactly right, and especially when you talk about the idea, for example, that Joe Biden didn't have the great voter enthusiasm when it came to his speeches, things of that nature. And we saw last week that the Democratic convention numbers were down, I think, about by 20%. It was a pretty decent number as far as broadcasting numbers go. They did come up a little bit as far as the digital realm, but when we talk about the digital realm, the Trump campaign has by far a much stronger digital reach on that front as well. So it's going to be interesting to see if, first of all, the viewership does go down on television, and secondly, how the digital arm does in kind of making those numbers more clear, understanding exactly who those types of numbers are reaching. So I think that's going to be something I'm going to be keeping an eye on this week as well. But Dan Eberhart, I appreciate you coming on tonight, breaking down what we should expect this week. Thank you.